Hey everybody, today is Monday, November 13th, 2023. Coming up on the show today, from Killers of the Flower Moon, editor Thelma Schoonmaker.
You know, Marty said I'm not making a documentary about the Osage. I'm making a film about a white man and an Osage woman who fall in love with each other. The love story is the basic thing that Marty decided to focus on when the idea about the film changed, because DiCaprio decided he would like to play Ernest instead of the role that Jesse Plemons plays, the FBI man. We did occasionally move things around, but you always do when you're editing, except for Goodfellas, where everything was perfect right from the start. That movie was like riding a horse. It knew where it wanted to go. We dropped only one shot. That film was just there. I mean, once you get addicted to film, it's so creative, it's so engaging. You know, you really do become addicted, and you would never want to give it up. It's the best job in the world.
Yes, all that and more on this edition of The Rough Cut. Hey there, welcome to the podcast. Good to have you here. Got another big show today. On the shorter side, but what it lacks in total runtime, it more than makes up for in wattage. For we have none other than editor Thelma Schoonmaker joining us today. Considering that you're listening to this podcast in the first place, you probably don't need anyone to explain who she is. But for the sake of formality, I can tell you that Thelma has been collaborating with director Martin Scorsese since the late 60s. Her 3 Oscar wins for Scorsese's Raging Bull, The Aviator, and The Departed tie her most notably with editor Michael Kahn. She is also tied with Mr. Kahn for 8 Best Film Editing nominations, which is a record for that category. However, Thelma's first nomination did not come from one of the many films she has done with Scorsese, but for the film Woodstock. She's on the show today to discuss her latest feature with Martin Scorsese, Killers of the Flower Moon. The film is based on a 2017 book by American journalist David Grann about the Osage murders. As Thelma is quick to point out, the book is nonfiction, whereas the movie, which is informed by both the book and members of the Osage Nation, is not a documentary. It's a love story at its core. A love story between Ernest and Mollie Burkhart, played by Leonardo DiCaprio and Lily Gladstone. So obviously most of our talk is going to be about Killers of the Flower Moon, but in discussing that film, Thelma also shares anecdotes about other films with Scorsese, including Goodfellas, Casino, Raging Bull, and Kundun. She also talks about her late husband, filmmaker Michael Powell, who was an influence, along with his co-filmmaker Emmerich Pressburger, on Martin Scorsese. So as I said, this one's on the shorter side. Thelma is calling in from England, where she's promoting the work of Powell and Pressburger, but it's full of great stuff that I think you'll enjoy. But before we meet Thelma, here are a few quick words about our sponsor, Extreme Music. Why do you need to know about them? Why can't we just get to the interview? Well, that's how the whole sponsorship thing works. But more importantly, if you're serious about making movies or TV shows, they are the ones you just got to know when it comes time to find the very best production audio for your project. Trusted by creators in the media industry since 1997, Extreme Music offers up tracks from every style and soundscape you could ever want, all easily searchable by metadata like tempo, genre, and lyrics. They'll give you options for how long the tracks are, maybe you want 30 seconds and not a minute. They'll give you options for instrumentation, maybe you want strings but no percussion. You can use their amazing reference track technology to send them a track you like, so they can find you ones from their enormous catalog that are just like it. You can even license the tracks right there on their website, or get a little hand-holding from one of their reps at an Extreme Music outpost near you. So the next time you got a little TV or movie magic to make it with great production audio from Extreme Music. Now then, without further ado, for your listening enjoyment, a true legend in the editing world. From Killers of the Flower Moon, here is Thelma Schoonmaker. So as much as I'd like to engage in more pleasantries, I'll just jump right into it. As I understand it, you typically come on when the film starts shooting, but prior to that, are there any ways that Martin Scorsese brings you into the process, perhaps in terms of feedback on the ideas for the film and the material before he begins shooting?
Rarely, but there was one time which I really enjoyed, which was when we made the movie Kundun about the Dalai Lama being forced to leave Tibet because of the Chinese invasion. He needed to have some idea about the sand mandala, which is a amazing sand painting that the monks do for 2 weeks using little funnels of different colored sand, and they create an amazing design with different symbols for the religion throughout. And After they finish doing this sand mandala on the ground, they do it kneeling, over it. They wash it all away in the river, which is a beautiful idea. And he wanted to start the film, Kundun, with some very tight images of some of the things we see in the mandala. So he sent me down to observe some monks creating a sand mandala in a studio in New York, where what they were doing was being filmed in a beautiful way for use throughout the movie. So there were times when we would suddenly feel that some images from that mandala would be helpful to us in certain transitions, particularly when the Dalai Lama is being forced to flee. So I just loved getting to know the monks and also getting to know the idea of making this mandala, which is so intense, and then washing it all away, which is a very Buddhist idea. So that was the only time that I actually was called in beforehand so that I could give him suggestions, this image is good and that one, and give him stills of them so he could know which ones he wanted to photograph.
Well, that is one of the great things about filmmaking is you get to learn so much about other people and places and time periods through the material. In Killers of the Flower Moon, you actually have a book that you could draw from. Did you read it, or was there any temptation to read it going into this project?
Oh, no. I absolutely knew I should read that book. I definitely read that. Oh, yes. That's what the film is based on, but it is a documentary book. It's not a fiction book. So it was Marty's desire to transform it into a movie. But the information in that book is so critical to understanding what happened and the wonderful, amazing way he found out things, which took him quite a while. And, that book is so popular because of what people have heard about the movie or knew already, that it was number one and may still be number one on the list of best-selling books. After the big reception of Killers at Cannes, it was number one, and number two is the second book that David Grann has written called The Wager, about a mutiny on a ship off the Cape of Good Hope or something. I don't even know what cape it is. I haven't read that one. I haven't had time to read that one. But so we have number one and number two on the bestseller list. And so people are using it as a wonderful source if they want to know more about what is being portrayed in the movie.
I have read that Marty, and that name sounds wrong coming out of my mouth, but for brevity's sake, I'll say Marty.
That's okay.
Thank you. Marty has an editing style and pace in mind going into a film.
Yes. He wanted, I think, to use a simple style and kind of get the viewer to engage with scenes where they're spending some time with the characters and really beginning to feel what they're like. So it was a simpler style than some of the other movies that he's made in the past. And so that would have been very strong in his mind. And that's one of the things about this film, I think, is that it has a certain build that is important. For example, the wonderful opening scene where early in the film where Ernest is invited to dinner by Mollie, and they are gradually feeling each other out. He's finding out that she's quite a formidable woman and with very strong opinions and dignity. And she is finding out that he's actually quite honest about his own weaknesses, that he is lazy and he likes to party. And it's interesting because it starts out sort of as a little joust between the two of them, and gradually you can feel their attraction to each other building. And the fact that he's handsome and that he's attracted to her allows her to think about him, even though he's confessed these weaknesses. And I think she feels that he wants a home. He's been through probably not an easy life, and being in World War I, coming back from something like that. She says later in the scene with her sisters, he's content. He's not going to run off, is basically what she's saying. She doesn't say those words. But she senses that maybe this is someone he does want to have a relationship with. And that develops gradually.
So we, the audience, we enter this world and learn and experience things through Ernest, but we're not really aligned with Ernest because, as you pointed out, we only get a true sense of who he is and the atrocities and the violence he takes part in over time. I mean, you give us a a quick scene showing him take part in a robbery and then losing the jewelry he stole in a poker game. So we know he's corrupt and simple and kind of dumb, but we still don't feel the depth of his betrayal and complicity in these violent crimes until later. Is that something that you had to focus on, calibrating how sympathetic we could be or even how much we could possibly like Ernest?
Yes, I do think that the love story is the basic thing that Marty decided to focus on when the idea about the film changed, because DiCaprio decided he would like to play Ernest instead of the role that Jesse Plemons plays, the FBI man. And that was a dramatic change, you can imagine, in the script. And they were still working on that as they were shooting, with the two actors, Lily Gladstone and DiCaprio, working with Marty to create scenes that would show the evolving love story. And this is all true because I think there were 3 trials. They couldn't get the DeNiro character in the first trial. I think there was a mistrial, and then he was found not guilty. And then finally, when the DiCaprio character decides to testify against his uncle, who has had him under his thumb for the entire movie, that's when they finally got Hale sent to prison, to Leavenworth. And I think that the FBI agent at that point said to the real Mollie, "Why do you stay with Ernest?" And she said, "I love him." So this love story is very important in the movie. And most people tell me they believe it. And there have been movies made by people like my husband, Peeping Tom, where there's a man who's a real, murderer.
Yes.
But you feel sympathy for the way he's been tortured and made into doing these terrible deeds. And that's why the critics flipped out and decided they wanted to destroy the movie, because they were feeling guilty about having any compassion for this man. But that's the great strength of the movie, which we've restored now and is being shown all over the place again in theaters. And that is something that's all due to Scorsese, who has always been the biggest supporter of Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger's films. From very early on, he went and found them living in oblivion, forgotten, these great masterpieces not seen anymore. And now they are being seen. And I'm in England now celebrating the work of the two great men. And young people are flocking to the screenings, and we're selling tickets, and it's really working. But that was all due to Marty and the British Film Institute.
I can't believe that you brought up Peeping Tom. I was not aware of this new effort, but I had a note, if we had time to talk about it, to tell you how much that film had an impact on me in film school. So that's incredible that you brought that up. But some other day, we'll talk about that a little more, I suppose.
Yes.
Describing editing is not an easy thing to do, considering how instinctive so much of it is. But I'm going to do my best to ask you about one scene in particular, and that is the first scene between Ernest and King Hale. Building the rhythm of that scene. It's a very basic, if I can use that word, it's a 2-shot, and then you have some over the shoulders between the two of them.
Yeah.
What drives the rhythm of that scene? As I was watching it, I just thought I wouldn't know where to go.
Well, you have fantastic performances to start with, which is always very helpful.
Yes, I imagine.
But what you should feel there, and I think you do, is that the DeNiro character, Hale, is feeling out this nephew of his. And he's trying to figure out if he can use him because he's attractive, he's unmarried. Can he use him to force his way into the wealth of Mollie's family? And so the one thing that was important there was to wait sometimes before De Niro speaks. And you see him looking, he's analyzing his nephew. He's got his head back and he's looking at him, sizing him up. And that was the way we worked on the rhythm of that scene, to make sure that we sometimes paused for a few seconds more than you normally would, because you see that De Niro's trying to make up his mind, what question should I ask next to find out if this guy is going to be a tool I can use? And DiCaprio it's obvious in the film that, he doesn't read, for example. His uncle says, "Do you read?" And he gets nervous right away, and he says, "Yeah, I'm not thick. I can read, but you can tell right away that he doesn't know how to read. Really, he can barely read. So he's been horribly educated, whereas his uncle is much better educated than him, and has this bizarre love of the Osage, at the same time that he is willing to inflict injury upon them. But that kind of a character is not rare in fiction. And it's fascinating to see this strange combination. And even DeNiro said it in the press conference at Cannes, I don't really understand him. How could he hold these two ideas in his body? But he played him beautifully. So that was how we did the rhythm of that scene. You know, it was some hesitations and some quiet moments.
Well, as you said, King Hale asks Ernest, can you read? And he asked that because he gives him a book. It's called Lily's Wild Tales Among the Indians, and it has a chapter on Osage culture and history.
Yeah.
And after Ernest meets Mollie on their first ride together, he doesn't read very well, but he does read some of the book out loud.
Yes.
For you, is this an effective means of providing backstory about the Osage to the audience? Is it a way to demonstrate Ernest's fascination with Mollie? Is it both or some other function altogether?
It was both. It was to show something about the Osage, only a little. You know, Marty said, I'm not making a documentary about the Osage. I'm making a film about a white man and an Osage woman who fall in love with each other. And the movie will be filled with the Osage culture, with people on screen and off screen. So many Osage worked on the film and are in the film. And so we did want to give some information about what had happened to the Osage, but we didn't want to spend too much time on that. And so the book was kind of a quick way to give us idea of some of their history.
I always felt like one way that you create forward momentum in the films that you do is by introducing characters before they're really part of the story and sort of instilling an anticipation for them. For example, the character of A.C. Kirby is brought up a few times as this feared henchman before he's ever actually there. Although I can't cite examples off the top of my head from your other films, I feel like that's something that has been a part of your style over the years. Am I just imagining that, or is there a conscious effort on your part to do that?
I mean, it could be. I didn't think of it that way, but you're right that he's talked about a lot, and you don't see much of him during the whole movie because he's only important as someone who blows up the house. He's not as important as some of the other wonderful character actors in this movie. But, you know, Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger used to do what they called place little bombs in a movie, little things that you may just barely notice that explode later. And it's not quite the same thing here, but that is something that Marty would have noticed in his, you know, devouring of the Powell Pressburger films.
The film is dedicated to the memory of musician and composer Robbie Robertson, somebody who's had a hand in the music in various ways for many of the films you've done. In this film, he's created a score that has a percussive nature that evokes the kind of drums and beat you might hear from indigenous musicians. And in that score, it sort of moves back and forth from almost a bluesy feel at times to then having a more edgy, almost dissonant sound. I'd like to hear about your process for working with him and the manner that you might use the stems from that music, like the drum beat or the throbbing bass line, to underscore certain moments in the film.
Well, I think the throbbing bass line was something that he came up with, and it's probably for both Marty and Robbie, not only the drums, which are so important to this culture, as you see in the last shot. You know, the dances that they do are very sacred. You have to be invited to them. They're not tourist things. So the drums are incredibly important, and they actually consider the drum a person as they do the pipe. So I think that Robbie, being half Mohawk, Marty definitely wanted an indigenous person to do the music, felt that this would drive the movie all the way through to the end when we actually see the drum. You know, it also is probably blood running through your veins. It's probably got a lot of significance, but the fact that he continuously employed it meant that in his mind he was giving it to Marty as a way to move the film along. And he sent us a great deal of material, and Marty would take it and structure it for the movie the way he thought it would work best. And so he hit upon the piece that you see in the beginning right away when you see the oil burst out of the ground and that very strong piece of music. And Marty said to me, I think this could be our theme. And it is in the film. However, there's also a lot of actual music from the time. Marty struggled really hard to make sure that the music he put in the film, other than the score by Robbie, was music that would actually have been heard at the time, either on a radio or on a record, like what you hear in the long Steadicam shot inside the house where all of Ernest's brothers and sisters and their wives and children have all sort of invaded the house that belongs to Mollie. And it begins with a record, a needle being put down on this wonderful piece of music. And so Marty has put a great deal of music other than Robbie's in the film, which he always does. He works really hard. He listens very carefully. He's sure to be accurate historically. And it gives a very rich sort of blend to the movie, to the sound of the movie.
Does Marty have a very specific set of tracks that he wants you to use, or is it a team effort?
Marty chooses the music. Marty has one of the great gifts for putting music to a movie of anybody, I think. I mean, sometimes on a film like Casino, we would have 6 or 7 pieces of rock and roll that he wanted to use in each scene, and we would play each one and try each one against the first cut of the scene, and usually one popped out. One would just fit perfectly. But it's his design, and he comes up with what to even play. And then I am part of putting it to the scenes and seeing if it works, and then being responsible throughout that the music is properly handled and mixed. So that's something he's just a genius at.
Well, something I heard you say once regarding the iterations that your films go through, you have 12 different edits of the film. Sounded like a lot to me. How did that work for Killers of the Flower Moon?
Yeah, well, we had about 12. I mean, that's the way we work. I build an assembly from Marty and I in the Oklahoma situation. We couldn't go to Oklahoma because Apple had a very excellent system to keep everyone from getting COVID. The crew and the actors, they were testing everybody all the time. And they wanted fewer people in Oklahoma to worry about. So we stayed in New York, and Marty and I worked on Zooms to look at the dailies together, and that's what we always do. He tells me what he thinks, and I tell him what I think. I make notes from all of that, and then I do the first assembly. He also gives notes to the script supervisor, all during the shooting, which are excellent and which I get and use all the time. So I make the first assembly, and then he and I cut everything together. And what we do is once we feel we have something that works, then we invite a small number of people and ask them afterwards what they think, and either accept or not. Sometimes we don't agree on what they say. And then we recut again and screen again and recut again and screen again. And we're very, very lucky to have that time to develop the movie properly.
Well, do you recall what were some of the more significant changes you made to the tone or the structure of the film through those 12 different iterations?
I think there were certain scenes we moved around, not a lot. The big change had been the love story becoming the central force of the movie. So we did whatever we could to make sure that worked, and people tell me it does. So I'm very happy to hear that. But we did occasionally move things around, but you always do when you're editing, I mean, usually, except for Goodfellas, where everything was perfect right from the start because Marty and Nick Pileggi were both so familiar with that world that they were working hand in hand, and that movie was like riding a horse. It knew where it wanted to go. We dropped only one shot, which was the young boy learning to drink espresso. That film was just there already. I mean, of course, there was a lot of editing, but it was interestingly a perfect structure.
Well, since you brought up Goodfellas, I interviewed editor Kevin Tent and director Alexander Payne the other day, and I asked them a question I'm about to ask you, and it kind of got me in a little trouble. But against my better judgment, I'll ask anyway. At the end of this movie, when Ernest is on the stand, I could not help but be reminded of Goodfellas. There's this same beat where Ernest, like Henry Hill, is asked to identify and point out the defendant. And it's Robert DeNiro in the courtroom. So with a body of work the two of you have going back over the decades, work that's been celebrated quite often, do you notice things like that? Or does Marty ever even refer to any work you've done in the past?
Oh, no, I don't think there's a comparison there because that's cut an entirely different way. We're cutting back and forth between DeNiro and the other criminals and Henry Hill. That's a whole different thing. What happened on the final scene in the trial is that Marty called me from the set and said, Leo is so brilliant in this first take I don't want to use anything else. I don't want to even cut to the prosecutor. I want to just hold on him all the way through his testimony. Now, we did have to cut to the prosecutor twice. I mean, once when he says, the person he is implicating here is, and swish pan with his arm pointing to DeNiro. So we did have to cut to him, but we stayed on Leo, just held on Leo. And that's one of the, I think, characteristics of this film is holding all the characters and making you really feel them, feel what they're going through. And it is a brilliant performance. And then cut to Mollie at the end. And then, of course, the next devastating scene where she asks him to be truthful with her and he can't do it. And she leaves him. It's very different from Goodfellas, yeah.
Well, that's why that question gets me in trouble. I'm going to stop asking it.
So you didn't get in trouble.
Well, that scene that you mentioned, that performance that Leo gave, the amount of takes that Marty typically gives you, does he indulge in doing a lot of different takes for his actors? Does he like to give you a lot of coverage, or is he very economical in the way he shoots?
It depends on the film. You know, a film like Raging Bull, where he did 15 takes at the very end of the film when DeNiro is confronting himself in the mirror. He and Bob were doing a very delicate change from take to take. They would whisper to each other between each take because they were trying to decide, should he be cold when he confronts himself, or should we feel some warmth towards him at the end? And Marty was adamant that he had to be cold, but we had the full range. However, normally he never shoots 15 takes. That was a very rare thing, and it's one shot, you know, so it's very important to get it right. So, no, he doesn't shoot a lot. He shoots less and less, actually, over time. My husband was he only did one take. And when you look at those movies and you see how brilliant the acting is, but those actors were working on the stage and making films at the same time in London, and they were so geared up, so prepared, so polished that he could just do one take. I mean, that's pretty astounding to Marty and me.
Yeah, well, and that's why they show that film in film schools.
That's right.
As I understand it, Martin Scorsese initially wanted to be a priest and you wanted to be a diplomat. Together, you both ended up being pretty terrific filmmakers. If you could have done anything else other than editing, what would it be? Would it be to work as a diplomat or something else entirely?
No. I mean, once you get addicted to film, it's so creative, it's so engaging. You know, you really do become addicted, and you would never want to give it up. It's the best job in the world, particularly working for Marty. Every film is different. Every film is a new challenge for me, and I'm working with one of the greatest directors who ever lived. So what more could you want? He also gave me the best husband anyone could want. So what more could you want? I've had it all.
Thelma's right. What more could you want? We should all be so lucky to feel that way about our chosen professions. What a treat and an honor to speak with Thelma today. Won't you please join me in thanking her for lending us her time and her talent? Hopefully we can catch up with her again someday and learn even more about her work with Scorsese and her insights on the craft of editing. Here's an insight for you. It's from me, so keep that in mind. But I think you should make Avid Media Composer part of your editorial craft. Great new features and functionality are being added all the time, including the new AI-enhanced script sync and phrase find toolsets. And the best way for you to learn about them is to click that link in the show notes that will speed you on over to the Media Composer page on avid.com. Well, that'll do it for today. I suppose I should give you the semi-regular reminder that if you are not actually subscribed to the podcast and the YouTube channel, that you could be missing out on great new content right when it comes out. Like next week when we do this all over again. Until then, this is Matt Fury thanking you for joining me right here on The Rough Cut.